Peter Bendix talks for the first time as Marlins president of baseball ops. What are the key takeaways from that one? Equally, we have some Jorge Soler news. More news. Are the Marlins engaged with a contract, maybe a multi-year contract with Jorge Soler? Oh my days, this saga will never end. There's tons to get into. And today's Locked On Marlins with Eli Sussman.
You are Locked On Marlins, your daily podcast on the Miami Marlins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings from England. Welcome to Locked On Marlins. It's your daily Marlins podcast. I'm your host, Peter Pratt. Hit me up, of course, on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Miami Marlins _UK. If you're listening to the pod, of course, hit subscribe. Start there. Also, this is your team every day, and thanks for making Locked On Marlins your first listen of the day. There is a YouTube channel. Of course, if you have not subscribed, make sure you do that immediately. Make sure you join the conversation in the comments. Also, that is where all the fun happens, or a lot of the fun anyway. Guys, it is the Wednesday, 8th of November episode. Firstly, the episode is sponsored and brought to you by FanDuel. And make every moment more right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. Delighted to welcome into the house the king of gifts, Eli Sussman. How are we doing, brother?
I'm fantastic, Peter. Appreciate the invite on the show as usual. And how's everything over there?
Everything is good. Everything is good. It's evening time here, as we know. Work, my day job is done. Kids are asleep. No wine yet, though. No wine. So maybe, we'll see how things go in this conversation. But everything's good. Everything's good. And things are, we're both in the Marlins content creating world, let's say. It's fair to say there's been plenty to talk about. Plenty to talk about in the past few days. It's just been fun, to be honest with you. It's been fun, and, we're going to dig into some of those themes today. So looking forward to it. On the slate today, Peter Bendix had his first public discussion, I guess, on the Hot Stove Show with Carl Seelaf yesterday. So we're going to dig into the main takeaways from that. Equally, some rumors circulating the Marlins may be engaging with Jorge Soler still. Maybe a multi-year deal in the offing. Who knows? Equally, we're going to look ahead to more generalist offseason outlook for the Marlins here. What does the budget look like for free agents? How are they going to shape this roster? Tons to get into here, so looking forward to it. Eli, Peter Bendix with Carl Seelaf. Firstly, it was great to at least hear him talking for the first time as Marlins president of baseball ops. There's an official presser, a full presser, in-person one on Monday. So I know multiple of your guys will be involved in that, I am sure. But main takeaways, firstly, on the Peter Bendix hire, your view on him specifically as president of baseball ops. And then we'll kind of dig into some of the themes from yesterday's Hot Stove Show.
Yeah, I thought it was an appropriate hire for this situation and somewhat predictable. I didn't individually identify him as the obvious candidate weeks in advance, but reading between the lines and sometimes just reading the lines directly from Bruce Sherman, he really he fetishes the Tampa Bay Rays and what they have done in building a sustainable contender on a shoestring budget. And he took the highest ranking available Rays executive. He took the guy that was number 2 over there, but had the GM title. And that was the highest available person that he could interview for this position. So just starting off with the interview that we heard on the show, Bendix explained that his in-person interview just happened last weekend with the team. And so we could reconstruct the pieces as best we can, that he probably did that interview on Saturday, woke up Sunday morning with a job offer, and by early Sunday evening, he was already reportedly telling his Rays employees that he was leaving. So they really did come together quite that fast. At this stage, we don't even have a clear idea of who else even reached the in-person interview stage. So what I was hoping for this time around is a thorough search process. And this whole thing, start to finish, as we're talking right now, we're barely 3 weeks removed from the official breakup from Kim Ng.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm not totally sure that we got to that. I don't know if this was really a thorough process. That being said, this is a guy that resume wise, you really couldn't be looking much more from a first time baseball ops leader. That's the one thing that you can not hold against him, but ideally, the perfect candidate for this position would be somebody like Peter Bendix, who had also been a POBO before with another organization, somebody that had done this particular job before. So he has not done that. Somebody that they reportedly had interest in was Chaim Bloom, which was his former boss with the Rays, who went on to be the chief baseball officer with the Red Sox. So whether it was him, whether it was James Click, those were other people that were out there that I think on paper, those would be the strongest possible candidates because but among the guys that are realistically available, this is one that it's really important that Bruce Sherman is comfortable with whoever he brings in and has trust in them, and that it goes both ways, that whoever is in this position, Sherman will take their opinion and weigh it very heavily so that when they ask for something and when they have ideas and they want to really insist on certain things, whether it's player wise or personnel wise, that Sherman will listen to them and that Sherman will support them in those endeavors. So this is outcome, all things considered, I think it's fine. And we could get into the specifics of the interview in a moment as well. So I'm still not pleased with the fact that Kim Ng is gone. I thought there should have been some path towards keeping her in the organization. You don't want to lose brain power and lose an important mind and voice. It's a respected person from your organization if you have any way of preventing that from going. But that being said, I can see a path towards the Marlins being successful in this way. And ultimately that is what Bruce is going after.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things for me was clearly Bruce had the conversation with Kim, hence why Kim decided, I'm not certain on this direction. And then it seems like, I don't know. I don't know if there was kind of pre-contact with Bendix and Bruce or not already. But me and Sean were thinking about this at the time, is thinking, okay, you have this conversation. Surely you maybe have someone in mind, like specifically if you're thinking about going down this path. I'm not sure that was actually the case. I think to your point, Bruce Sherman, he sees a lot to like with the Rays for obvious reasons. And to your point as well, Peter Bendix, effectively the best available guy from that front office. So makes a ton of sense for that fit. But the timing and the pace that you called out here, I think is all really intriguing to work out what were the kind of milestones in this total kind of event, including the conversation with Kim, the exercising the option, her declining the option, then accelerating this process with Peter Bendix, thus landing in. So it's a really fascinating situation. But for Kim Ng, thinking back, this surely was a situation where Kim, Peter Bendix could absolutely coexist, in my opinion, with the Marlins. And I think, to your point, that's the only it feels unnecessary anyway, where you lose Kim. And I thought she brought tremendous qualities in many ways to the Marlins. And, I thought she did a great job, particularly last year, obviously. But, losing Kim, I think, is a step backwards. Peter Bendix has a different approach, clearly, and will add qualities. But I think combined, they would have been a great team, to be honest with you. And I think that's the Marlins' loss, inevitably, that Bruce Sherman couldn't quite sell this to Kim. I think that was the problem. What about you on that one?
Right. And another element to this is it seems like what we've been able to gather from the reporting and even what Bendix touched on now is this, what Sherman was looking for in this front office with keeping Kim around perhaps as the number 2 person in the hierarchy. Whether you could argue whether she deserved to be the POBO or not, but there did seem to be a willingness at least to invest more in building out the front office and having a POBO and a GM at the same time, where now essentially the top person is the top person. So the POBO in any situation is the same as a GM in a POBO-less front office. Whoever has the highest title is doing the same sort of stuff. Bendix is essentially going to be doing the same sort of things that Kim was doing the last couple of years. And so I am curious to see, it did interest me, and I guess get me optimistic that Bruce is kind of willing to pay more full-time high-ranking executives to be in the front office at the same time if he can find the right mix of them. And now a question coming out of this Bendix hiring he touched on in the interview is that there is no imminent process, it seems, to hire a GM underneath him. He is going through, he is assessing who he has, who he's inheriting, what exactly he needs, the skill sets that they're missing, what particular roles he's trying to fill. And at least in that interview, maybe things change. Maybe by next Monday, he has more clarity on that he didn't seem, at least he didn't admit to opening up a GM search process yet. So that'll be there. Bruce is giving him some flexibility, I guess, to fill out this front office as he seems fit. Ultimately, I think the most effective way to capitalize on this is by hiring as many people as possible, by trying to bring some of the people from Tampa Bay that he already knows and works well with over with him. And maybe it just takes a little bit of time for us to get a clearer idea of how all that works out. And it should be noted, the New York Mets are kind of in a similar position where they just hired David Stearns as their president of baseball operation. And as it turns out, he is going to go through this offseason without a GM. Like he originally, he inherited a GM in Billy Epler, and then Epler pretty abruptly resigned amidst a very bizarre investigation that MLB is doing. And he is not seeking to replace him very imminently. So there are other situations around the league that you can kind of compare this to. But yeah, overall, this is one of the few jobs that were open around baseball at the time. And one of my other concerns with like letting go of Kim in the circumstances that it happened is I didn't feel that this would be a super desirable job opening, seeing her go out after coming off a postseason appearance. And so I do wonder perhaps if that had played out differently, whether the Chaim Blooms or James Clicks or other people like that would have actually been eager to go through this process. Maybe they would have felt differently about this organization. Again, at this point, we can kind of turn the page on that decision and just follow what it is that Bendix tries to do to put together a front office. As he's one of the younger people. You mentioned this. I think he's slightly younger than you are. And he's not that much older than I am either. It's an interesting, he's a very interesting position. Only 38 years old to already be given the keys to one of the only 30 MLB franchises.
Yeah, for sure. It's going to be really interesting. And I kind of like that, actually. The fact that, and we'll talk about it in a sec, we've got to get into the first ad. But before we, just to kind of round that up, I think it's interesting or makes sense to just hit the pause button. It's like, there's going to be guys in the Marlins organization he doesn't really know that well, clearly, at this point. There'd be, some element of understanding skill sets and working out what he's got to work with already. Equally, he's probably sanding out some of his guys in the Rays and maybe other organizations that he knows, and he's thinking about, okay, what's the general pool of resources available to me? And you'll then start to piece things together based on like who's available, rather than just we have to hire a GM. I don't know who that's going to be yet, and we're just going to make that hire for the sake of it. There's no need to. There's no need. He's been filling that role anyway, and so his skill set sits there anyway. And listen, the Rays roster, 40-man, 26-man, whatever. It's been one hell of a roster in terms of getting the results done anyway. Limited star names at times, but they certainly get results and they get wins, which is what counts, I guess. So let's talk about our good friends over at FanDuel. Then we'll kind of continue that conversation around the hot stove conversation specifically. Equally, this Jorge Soler rumor is what I will classify at this point, and a broader outlook for the offseason. And guys, listen, you've got to get yourself into FanDuel. If you haven't, what have you been doing? What have you been doing? But NFL season is absolutely here in full force right now. And new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about FanDuel, then, well, you probably should have already signed up. But there's no better time to get on the action than now. And the app is super easy to use. They've got all the betting options you need, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So all you have to do, and it is really simple, you visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. There we go. Eli's in. He's hitting promo codes galore, which is great to see. Guys, you're here with me, Peter Pratt, and Eli Sussman on Wednesday, the 8th of November. Eli, Peter Bendix speaking to Carl Selaf. Good interview. main takeaways for you from that specifically. You've kind of touched on a couple. The GM, I think, situation and role was certainly one of them, but I think there are a few other takeaways. But what was your take on this one?
One of the kind of understandably, the reputation that he had from afar, or at least the perception, is that he was, for lack of a better word, a nerd. He was somebody that did not play baseball at a very high level. He's somebody that found his understanding and his expertise in baseball mainly through analytics and through analyzing the game and making those connections between what happens statistically and how it connects on the field and working his way up the organization that way. So it was kind of my fear that he might be a little impersonal, that he might be somebody that was perhaps that prioritized that stuff. That kind of, you kind of suspected that he might be somebody that leaned very heavily into that and felt very strongly about it. And so I found it was really refreshing that unprompted multiple times, the thing he chose to emphasize and prioritize was people and connecting with people, bringing the right people, empowering people. That was a word he used multiple times, empowering people, giving them the freedom to try things, to make mistakes. And the fact that he identified the particular thing about the Rays organization, the differentiator being the culture that they have over there. And I think that might surprise people. Again, from afar, that organization as a whole having a reputation of being one that is very regimented and in terms of obeying what it is that's most efficient, both on and off the field, and doing things that are catered to that. And sometimes putting that stuff ahead of some other factors, making unpopular decisions. The Rays are near the top of the list of making unpopular decisions with some of their players, letting them go at very strange times.
Yeah.
And yet, on the field, still continuing to perform. They're in the stretch of 5 straight postseason appearances and a much longer stretch, basically 15 years, his entire time in the organization, for the most part, being a competitive team, despite some of those unorthodox decisions. So that is what I found refreshing and encouraging, that despite being somebody that it's a good thing, the Marlins are an organization that does need better analysts. They need more analysts. They need better quality analysts. They're a team that even under Kim Ng, I think you can, like, just from following the team, you can understand in a couple places where it seems that they fell behind some of these other organizations in terms of the way that they use numbers and put guys in their best positions to succeed. And probably the biggest thing, using data to help guys improve even when they reach the big league level. There are all these stories across baseball, but probably on a team basis, nobody more than the Rays. They take major leaguers from other organizations that are afterthoughts. Randy Arozarena, most recently this past year, Luke Raley being a guy that they got for basically nothing, and he was one of the better hitters in the big leagues, at least during the first half of the season.
Yeah.
My boy Harold Ramirez is enjoying his career, and they barely gave up anything to get him. So that is something very important that he can bring to the organization. That definitely stood out, is the way that he values people. He barely referenced numbers at all or analytics during the course of that conversation. That was interesting to hear from him.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking about one of his people now, I guess, Skip Schumaker, how does this impact Skip? He's obviously up as the one of the 3 potential NL managers of the year. I think he's going to win it, actually. I think he deserves to be honest with you, but we'll see. How do you see this impacting Skip Schumaker? I mean, the contract situation is he's under contract for 24. There's a team option, I believe. I don't believe it's mutual. So team option 25. For me, he had a great year. It's going to be interesting to see how it goes in year 2. But just more generally with this kind of relationship now, how does this impact Skip, do you see?
It's really hard to say because they don't know each other. There is no pre-existing relationship there. There are plenty of examples in history where once there's a change high up in the executive ranks, that the manager themselves, they're usually does not stay long under the new leadership. So now he's only been here 1 year, and his only track record as a major league manager was a very positive one across the board in more ways than one, finding ways to create extra value for the team and by all accounts creating a clubhouse environment that players wanted to be a part of. So it is it's a very particular, unusual situation for somebody that you really can't. There's not much you can criticize about the way that he's been a manager so far. As best we know, it hasn't been particularly reported, but I think salary wise, he is one of the cheaper managers in baseball, having been a first time manager. And I think that was one of the reasons that made it easier to turn the page from Don Mattingly. I think even compared to Donnie being somebody that is more affordable in 2024, and then whatever that club option value is, I imagine as well. So it's not like you're kicking him out to cut corners and pinch pennies in that respect as well. No. It's a big question mark, but you have to think that if he just does a lot of the things in 2024 as he did in 2023, that should earn him an extension, not just a guarantee of the 2025, but also years beyond that. So we'll have to find out. They'll have to meet each other. That's something where perhaps that'll be one of the bigger storylines of the winter meetings. Once both Skip and Bendix should both be there, and they'll have a chance to actually get introduced to one another. So we'll have a better idea once we get to that point. But I am about as high on Skip as quite a number of other people are in terms of what he does and the amount of effort that he puts into managing the team. So I don't think there's any reason to fear an imminent change right there. It'll just be up to him to try to do some of the things he did this past year. It seems that he's retaining most or all of his coaching staff from last year. We haven't heard about any changes to his coaching staff yet. So that'll be pretty important too. As long as he is given the trust of Bendix to keep his guys together and continue doing what they did this past year to overachieve as much as they did, then it'll be really hard to go with anybody else. Yeah, for sure. One of the main storylines thus far has been this managerial hot stove. That's been one of the early themes of going into free agency, etc. It's just the activity that's going on. A lot of people piecing things together and, et cetera, et cetera. But to your point, we haven't heard anything regarding any of the Marlins coaching staff, taking interviews elsewhere or anything like that. I've seen some ex-Marlins get in roles. I think James Rouson's taken a role, I think, at the Yankees maybe. And Eric Dames, I think, has got a role maybe with the White Sox. So there's some ex-guys. Donnie's changed his role as well with the Blue Jays. Plenty happening, but not impacted the Marlins, which for me, a couple of things here just to wrap up here on Skip. One of the main things that came out in looking back on last year was the culture and the tone that Skip set. And I think that does sink into kind of what Peter Bendix is saying and the secret sauce, really, of the Rays. It's like the culture and the people. And I think there's a good alignment with those guys on that. And I think it's going to be an interesting partnership with these guys. I think it's going to be beneficial both ways. I think there's things for both of them to learn from each other. So I think that's going to be really interesting. I'm just interested to see the way it's handled moving forwards, whether they look to do something kind of with that team option and formalize that and get that, that guaranteed in there. We'll see. We'll see what that looks like, I guess. But it doesn't need to be rushed. I think that's the main thing is there's other decisions that have to be made now. So prioritize your time accordingly and maybe have that kind of off the record conversation with Skip. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. So the main things, it was Peter Bendix did talk about Skip briefly, talked about his time with the Rays. He talked about what I would say balancing short-term and long-term objectives was the way maybe it was phrased. In effect, to your point, what you lent into there, the Rays, one of the things that stood out about the Rays is their decision-making around players that, particularly arbitration guys, where all of a sudden, surprisingly, a move is made. And I must say that, for me, is the thing that I'm going to be keeping my eye on most here now to see how this plays out with all of those arbitration guys. There's a decent-sized class. The Rays have an even bigger class, actually, looking at it. But, those guys that are in, year 2, 3 of ARB, I think it's really intriguing to see how things play out with them. If the Marlins look to, flip them into something different, generate some value elsewhere. So that, for me, is going to be a really interesting wrinkle here. The guys we're talking about, I guess, is, it's Luis Arias, it's Tanner Scott, final year of his deal, Jesus Luzardo, Jazz Chisholm moving into ARB, a few of the other guys too, John Birdie. So I think that's going to be interesting because if they are truly going to morph into the Rays, then those upper ARB eligible guys are the ones that
are going to be moved. Like that's the model.
Right.
And that should be our expectation, right? Is that these guys are likely to be moved. We should maybe even include Sandy Alcantara in that mix. I know he's not available for 24, but this is going to be a huge shift in the way that the club is operated, I think. So I don't know if we kind of look at those and that class and those guys, do you see a headliner being moved maybe even this off season as they look to maybe go in slightly different directions and reallocate funds and beef up farm or get some cheaper guys in? I don't know.
Yeah, the one name to watch, somebody that is certainly at his peak value right now, but also at the end of his club control, is Tanner Scott, having
Absolutely.
one of the best reliever season in Marlins history, if not on the very short list of those. He's going to earn a decent raise from last year, still be a great value for whichever team he's on in 2024. And then after that, he's going to be a free agent. And if his 2024 is anything like his 2023, then it's going to wow people how much money he would make in free agency. He would be, he'd be somebody earning not $100 million, but like not far off if he is pitching at that level for a second consecutive year. And yet he is somebody that before 2023, he's had a very uneven track record, mainly because he just couldn't throw strikes or he wouldn't throw strikes. And so there were times where the walks led to a whole lot of inconsistency from him. So he's a risky player to sign long-term. Even if you were to approach him with an extension now, it would be a substantial amount of money for a reliever. And it would also come with some risk, because every reliever comes with some risk, especially those like him that only really find the best version of themselves in their late 20s. But yet I think he'd have a lot of surplus value on the market, and there would be bigger market teams that wouldn't shy away from getting 1 year of control about him, because they would be in the mix to resign him if he did have a second consecutive great year. If you look to the Rays in their history is for any sort of precedent, like they handed out their fair share of extensions through the years that aged well, but I cannot think of any for relievers that for this kind of caliber. Relievers to them are extremely volatile, and they have built a team where it's not so much about the 26-man roster. It really is about the whole 40-man, a constant cycle of relief arms, guys you've never heard of, or guys that you remember being terrible for one team that they come to the Rays and they're amazing. There's this constant cycle of acquiring guys, making adjustments to bring out the best in them, and with few exceptions, really cherishing having the flexibility to bring them up and send them down when they inevitably go through slumps, as even the best guys do in this situation. Is like, to me, I thought no matter who was in charge, that Tanner would be a candidate like that. I think the Marlins will take some time to decide, because he's not a non-tender candidate. He is going to get paid this upcoming season by somebody. And if they do move him, they could get a considerable return, I imagine, to address some of the other roster needs that they have. So yeah, that's one that comes to mind. And I'm sure there'd be a lot of interest in him if they decide to move him.
Yeah, no doubt. I think it's just going to be really interesting, and I need to get a little bit closer to the Rays of their roster management historically and just try to work out like what that looks like and get some precedent going. So, because that is the model. It's the model we're working with now, and that's what they're going to look to recreate. That's why you go and hire Peter Bendix, because that's what he can deliver. And so you have to trust the process. Process you may not agree with. In some ways, it may feel painful or confusing, some of these moves, but it is what it is. So we're going to be, it's going to be interesting to follow. Briefly on Jorge Soler, no qualifying offer. I went off on a large rant yesterday about that with some, I wasn't happy with that. But anyway, let's not dwell on that. Some rumors today circulating that maybe the Marlins are back in on Jorge Soler. Can you see that situation playing out here? If they're going to be entering into like a multi-year, type of agreement with Jorge Soler? I just can't see it personally, considering the way things have played out, but maybe I'm just clouded by yesterday's rant. I don't know. Where do you sit on this one, Eli?
You and we don't agree on all sorts of Marlins analysis, but I do have to say, I think we are in lockstep on this Jorge Soler issue. I loved your episode on him. I agreed on almost every point that you made about that. I thought it was a big missed opportunity to not issue him a qualifying offer. And I thought that the organization forfeited an opportunity to have this compensatory draft pick waiting for them in 2024 once he declined that offer. And so the rumor from Francis Romero that came out shortly before we started recording is that about 6 different teams are interested, and he singled out the Marlins as being one willing to give him a multi-year deal. And I saw some feedback on Fish on First on Twitter about how, well, of course they can still give him a multi-year deal. They just didn't want to pay him $20 million next year. Soler, he's in a position where this is going to be his last big payday. I think he recognizes that. He's a somewhat inconsistent designated hitter. He's going to be 32 years old next year. The difference between him being one of the most desirable players on the market and being an all-star and him almost being out of the league, it's a very thin edge that he's walking on, because he has so much of his value is in his bats, and in particular his ability to hit for power and be available to be on the field as well. These guys, they can fall off a cliff very suddenly. He's not going to chance it. As much as tantalizing as that salary would have been next year in a qualifying offer, he wanted to maximize his guaranteed money. He knew, because even I knew, and even you knew, that there were going to be a lot of teams interested in giving him multiple years on the market as well. That he is out there to secure as much guaranteed money as he can, because there might not be another guarantee if things go sideways. He needs to protect his future and capitalize on the great year that he had. But to answer your question, I think we've seen this movie before with the Marlins the last couple of off seasons as well, where they do genuinely have interest in some good hitters that are available in free agency. You're just not going to get those guys efficiently if they're one of the very best available players at their position. And so Soler is one of the very best hitters available in free agency this year. Great circumstances for him to capitalize on. Whoever signs him is going to pay a big premium in terms of years and in terms of average annual value. I think the absolute floor is he's going to get $40 million guaranteed. Most likely that's a floor, like a 3-year deal, maybe 2 for 40. I think he's going to go well beyond that over a 3-year deal when it's all said and done. We saw somewhat of a version of this with Starling Marte when he was a free agent. The team was genuinely interested, and the Mets made a kind of a reckless offer. You couldn't compete with that. So that is how this is going to play out, I imagine, under these circumstances. And it's a shame that they can't even have that draft pick as compensation to bring with them moving forward.
Yeah, agreed. Well summarized, Eli, on that one. We're running low on time, but I did want to ask you, off-season outlook in general. Like, I think the indications are that payroll is clearly not going to be heavily bumped up and increased. It's most likely at this point. You wrote a great article, so I strongly recommend everyone go and check that out if they haven't already. Probably most people listening to this have seen that article and dug into it, and it was extremely well thought out. At the time, I don't think he'd baked in the fact that Josh Bell was opting into his deal, and how that changes things, I don't know. But one thing for me, this offseason really hinges around where they go with shortstop. I'm really intrigued to see where they go. And so we are running low on time. So the question I've got for you, Eli, is opening day shortstop. Who do you think that's going to be for the Marlins? There's a lot of water to go under, a lot of bridges here. When all said and done, what's your gut feel telling you?
I do think it's going to come via trade. The one that I singled out in that offseason blueprint of mine was working out some kind of deal for Tommy Edman of the Cardinals, who is, he's not an ideal solution. He's been a utility player for most of his career, but played more shortstop than ever this past year, did very well at it. And he brings, comparing him, there are some loose similarities between him and Joey Wendell. There is the downside that his bat totally dries up at some point in the near future. I don't think it's going to happen yet. And even if it does, as a base runner and as an overall defender, and in terms of durability as well, I think he's a pretty significant upgrade. 2 years of club control if they were to make that trade for him. That's what probably they're going to be sniffing around in, are guys with multiple years of control. The guys that are already established as everyday shortstop, those guys are just going to be really hard to obtain with the assets that the organization has. So it's either going to be on that side of the spectrum of changing utility-ish guys into everyday shortstops, or rolling the dice on somebody that is pre-ARB and not fully established in the big leagues yet. Somebody that was once a highly rated prospect, but hasn't really figured it out. It hasn't really clicked, at least not with the bat, since reaching the big leagues. So there are going to be a lot of area. They're going to flip over every stone trying to find one. But ultimately, if the value is not there and the deal isn't there, they got to be willing to settle for a stopgap and potentially reconsider and look back during the upcoming summer or the next offseason. You'd love to have it fixed right now, but this goes back to the Bendix motto about always being disciplined and looking out for the long term. So he's not going to force something if it doesn't make a lot of sense for them.
Yeah, agreed. I think we've long had that Cardinals Marlins trade partner connection kind of circling around, looking for like the dearth of outfielder talent. They just got too many. The Cardinals are so heavily weighted offensively with a load of guys coming through the system. And there's been like a clear challenge for them from a pitcher perspective. And so the clubs absolutely match up, in my opinion, to do something. I think it's long overdue to get something done. And I think this offseason, probably is the perfect time for both clubs to pull the trigger on something. Speaking of that, it's time to pull the trigger on the end of this episode. Guys, I appreciate everyone for tuning in, making Locked On Marlins your first listen of the day, of course. I appreciate Eli Sussman joining me. Be sure to get Eli at Real Eli on X and also follow all the work on Fish on First. The guys will have you covered right through the offseason as we do here on Locked On. Guys, tomorrow, I promise, unless there's any major breaking stuff, I'm going to talk about Trevor Bauer to the Marlins. It's time. I've teased that out multiple times. So we're going to talk about potential Trevor Bauer hookup with the Marlins. It's going to be polarizing, but that's what we do here on Locked On Marlins. So look forward to seeing you then.